Hello all. It's Tuesday morning when I'm recording this, but as I said last week, Ken and I are having a 3-day mini vacation beginning in a few hours, and then I have the ALL Parents Retreat this weekend. So this was the only time I could record this. I hope that all are well. This week's Parsha is Parshat Tzav. We are in the book of Vayikra, lots and lots of rules and regulations, and in that spirit, the title of this talk is Kohanim, Karbanot and Unattainable Perfection. So our Parsha is about the various offerings, the role of the Kohanim, and their station as supervisors and presenters of the Karbanot, the sacrifices. Those very involvements, as we have discussed, bring us closer to God as a collective, become, if you will, our communication channel. And Korban, Kuf, Reish Bet, is the same sheresh as karov, to get close, Kuf Reish Bet. The focus on Kohanim is attested to by those who refer to this Sefer, Vayikra, also as Torat Kohanim, as is Sifra. These are the other names that are given to it, the midrashic appendage to Sefer Vayikra, or Torat Kohanim, the Torah of the Kohanim. There's a dizzying amount of details here, and it looks as if everything is considered and mapped out with specificity in all needed instructions. For example, from part of the second Aliyah in chapter 6 of Vayikra, we read as follows. Daber el Haram ve'el banav lemor zot Torat hachatat. Again, this is the Torah of the sin offering, of the chatat, b'makom asher tishachet ha'oleh, in the place that you should slaughter it. Tishachet hachatat lifnei Hashem, you slaughter the sin offering before God. Kodosh kodoshim he. This is the holiest of holy sacrifices. So just like we talk about Kodesh Kodoshim in terms of the Mishkan and in terms of the Beit HaMikdash, we also talk about Kodshei Kodoshim, the holiest of the sacrifices, of the Korbanot. The Kohen who offers it up as a chatat, as a sin offering, shall eat it. It shall be eaten in a holy place in the courtyard of the tent of meeting. So note, the place is kadosh. The Kohen is kadosh, and we're going to get back to that. The offering is kadosh, and the time is also mikudash, sanctified, specified, determined. So, it says, hamechateh, the person who offers this up as a sin offering, who performs the components of the service, is what makes the sin offering a sin offering. In other words, we're told which animals can be used, what condition the animals can be in, and we're going to get back to that as well. But the actual procedure must be followed. As we said earlier, you can have all of the elements in place, but if it's not lishmo, if it's not mikaben lishmo, if it's not intended for its own purpose, then it can be psul. It can be made unholy. It can be disqualified. So what we understand here is that knowledge, preparation, and so much else is needed for the one who does this. The Kohen who offers it as a sin offering shall eat it. Why the Kohen? Because the Kohen is the one who prepared it, who chose it, who prepared it, who offered it, and now who eats it. It all must be done in the same level of Kedusha. Now, it says, HaKohen. Sounds like every Kohen, right? But as we go through this, we're going to find that there are many disqualifying features of the Kohen who can do this. The Kohen who is unclean at the time, who has any sense of tum'ah. And remember, the Kohanim were the examiners, they were the doctors. So tum'ah mavet, uncleanliness due to contact with a dead body, was something that always happened. And that would disqualify the Kohen. But there are many, many disqualifications that we're going to come to later that you'll see what we're looking at here. Anything that touches its flesh shall become holy. Kol asher yigah b'basara yikadesh. Remember the para aduma, right? It can make what's holy unholy, what's pure impure, and what's impure pure. And here we're talking about kedusha. We're also talking about tahara, but mostly we're talking about kedusha. But again, they are linked. Anything that touches its flesh shall become holy. Any garment on which the blood of the animal has been sprinkled, you will wash in a holy place. In other words, if the sin offering itself is invalidated for any reason, everything that touches it is invalidated. And if it is acceptable level of kedusha, then everything absorbs that level of kedusha as well. And this is all spelled out in Torah Kohanim, which is the explanation of a lot of what goes on in Vayikra, and the very name that often is given to Vayikra as well. This must be done in an earthenware vessel, v'chocheresh, which is cooked, shall be broken. But if it's cooked in a copper vessel, it will be purged and rinsed with water. And here we get into these very complicated laws of tum'ah, which has to do with absorption. We watched my son-in-law, Jeremy, teach his girls how to wash dishes so that they are washed, not just that you sprinkle them with water. I can think of some adults that would learn this lesson well. But his idea was that any germs, any residue, anything should be washed off of the glass. So we understand that's much easier with glass. It's not as easy with, for example, crockery or with ceramic cookware. For that reason, the rules of kashrut in terms of what we use and what can only be for meat or dairy and what could theoretically be used for both are different. They are of a different level because of the deal of absorption. The scientific knowledge here, the understanding of what absorbs is impressive. But also, the other thing is, if something is tahara, if something is pure, if something is clean, if something is ready to be used in the hakdish to make something holy, it cannot have any residual other elements in it at all. I mean, think about this. If you ever crack a piece of pottery and you go and you wash it, it will, and you run your hand across the part that is cracked, you will see that it's hard to ascertain when it's absolutely dry because the liquid does get absorbed. We know this. So an earthenware vessel, because the absorption that has been absorbed in the vessel becomes notar, which is another part of these laws, what is left over. Leftovers, I cook for Shabbat and you have leftovers during the week. It's not so easy here. The leftover must be destroyed by burning. And then the food in the wall of the earthenware vessel must be destroyed because it touched the leftover. It was not pure. It was not as properly separated or identified as it should be. So all of this, the purging, the rinsing, the preparation, it's all very, very complicated and it's very detailed and it takes time and it can be exhausting as we think about getting ready to clean for Pesach. Let me put this in perspective. What we're doing is a fraction of all of this, even the most OCD amongst us when it comes to cleaning for Pesach. And that was especially for some of my friends, and you know who you are. All right, at any rate, then after we explain how the offering is to be prepared and offered, we then get to the Kohanim, which I promised you we would get back to the Kohanim. Kol zachar b'kohanim yochalotam, kadosh kadoshim hi. Any male from the Kohanim may eat it. It is from the Holy of Holies. However, not so simple. Not so simple. Any sin offering whose blood was brought into the tent of meeting to make atonement shall not be eaten. It shall be burnt. So, This seems straightforward. Kol Kohen Shezachar, right? Every male Kohen. But in the Gemara, in the Mefarshim, in the Mishneh Torah, and elsewhere, there are many, many provisos and limitations on who can serve as a Kohen. And the actual understanding of this little phrase, Kol Zachar b'Kohanim, means every male amongst the Kohanim, except for those for whom blemishes would disqualify them from serving. Just as for the animals, there are many mumim, there are many blemishes that would not allow an animal to be offered, so too for the Kohanim, there are many blemishes that would not be allowed for a Kohen to serve. So amongst them, which number more than 90, Tishim, we include various ones associated with blindness or vision impairment, lameness or inability to walk, an excessively low nasal bridge, such that a straight brush could apply ointment to both eyes simultaneously. This is from the Gemara, guys, and from Amplified in the Mishneh Torah. Disproportionate limbs, if one limb is even a fraction of an inch longer or shorter than the other. A broken arm or leg. Unequally long limbs. Hunchback. Dwarf. Any unseemly growth. A blemish. A mole. A crippled foot or hand. Cataracts. A white streak that goes through the juncture between the sclera and iris in the eye. Certain types of boils, crushed or in any way abnormal testicles, excessive or not enough height, too much height, crooked eyes, proper size forehead, and the list goes on and on and on. A Kohen who is afflicted with any one of these imperfections, any one, would be deemed unfit for service. However, should it be a correctable imperfection, he would become re-eligible for service once the defect is corrected. So remember, this is BPS, before plastic surgery. So if someone's born and the nose bridge is off, or the eyes are crooked, or you have ptosis or anything, or your mouth droops or anything, you were not permitted to serve as a Kohen. Kohanim with these blemishes would be allowed to perform work in the temple outside of the sacrificial service and outside of other services from which they would be excluded. In other words, they could advise, they could be leaders, but these services, which were sort of the plum assignments of being a Kohen, were not available to them. Since the priests, the Kohanim, served a unique role of service amongst the nation of Israel, that is, service in the Holy Temple and consumption of the Trumah, so the Torah requires them to follow unique rules of ritual purity in order to protect themselves against any tumah, any ritual defilement. Some of these rules are still maintained today in Orthodox Judaism. If you want to have an understanding of how intense this is, read the Avodah service in your Yom Kippur Machzor, and you will come to it with a new understanding after hearing this context. Kohanim, until today, are forbidden to come in contact with dead bodies. They are permitted, however, to become defiled by a dead body for their closest relatives, their father, their mother, their brother, their unmarried sister, but not their married sister, and child. Defilement of a Kohen to his wife, though not biblically explicit, is permitted by rabbinical order. A Kohen is forbidden, until today, to enter any house or enclosure in which a dead body or part thereof may be found. Practical examples of these prohibitions include not entering a cemetery or attending a service for a funeral, not being under the same roof in a house or a hospital as a dismembered organ. The exact rules and regulations of defilement are quite complex, but a cursory rule of thumb is that they may not enter a room with a dead person or come within a few feet of the body. Proximity to the corpse of a non-Jew is less serious and may only be an issue if actual contact contact is established. So, first of all, if you'll notice in Jewish cemeteries, there are sidewalks that run outside of the perimeter of where the graves are, where the kvarim are. And Kohanim will stay on that outside perimeter. I personally have seen in family and friends Kohanim that lose a very close relative and have to maintain this distance. And it's hard. It's hard. They're not maintaining that level of tahara, purity, because they're going to be offering sacrifices, but we still do observe those services. So I think one of the takeaways of this for me is that whereas we're always talking about, we're going to see this later in Sefer Vayikra, where we talk about Tazria Mitzara, where everybody knows about, women who have their period and the time afterwards of cleanliness and all that. So this is for men. We have a lot of issues regarding men as well in terms of tahara. And I think we would do well to remember that what is the purpose, what is tahara, what is ritual purity, what is kedusha, what is holiness, and what is, being unclean, being meluklak, dirty. It's not the same thing. It's very, very different. And we should not be so inflamed as to think it's anti this group or anti that group, because everyone was subjected to these restrictions based on their function in the community. Until today, according to halachically directed Jewish practice, modern-day Kohanim are obligated to guard against ritual defilement, as prescribed by the Talmud, in order to protect them from coming into contact or proximity with the dead. For example, Orthodox cemeteries also traditionally designate a specific burial ground for Kohanim, which is at a distance from the general burial ground. So again, if you're married to a Kohen, think about that. These restrictions are still observed today. That is done so that the sons of deceased Kohanim, who are also themselves Kohanim, can visit their father's graves without entering the cemetery. They're also careful not to be in a hospital or airplane or any enclosed space where a dead body is present. In some of the hospitals in Israel, you will see if somebody has died and someone is in any proximity to where a Kohen would walk, there's a sign in front of the hospital, and the Kohanim would know whether or not they may go into the hospital. So this is very complicated. It's still practiced. It's still part of the bandwidth of Torah law. And, again, it may be something that we bristle at, but it is part of our world. Additionally, they are limited in who they can marry and gatherings of which they can be part. Similarly, regarding the Karbanot themselves, there are again many restrictions, also around 100 or so, that preclude animals from being acceptable. Physical limitations, blemishes, both permanent and temporary, with appropriate instructions, and so forth. Within our modern day context and our sensibilities to differences and inclusion, this may seem draconian, harsh, prejudicial on so many levels. There is indeed a discomfort with the notion of such exclusions as early as our Mishnah. By this time, sacrificers are no longer the means of worship and public gathering, but we have adopted tefillot as our means of connection to God. Now the Kohen's role is to bless the people, but here as well, any blemish, any mum, disqualifies. In the Babylonian Talmud in Megillah 24:2, we read, Kohen sheyesh b'yadav mumim lo yisa ekapav. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, af mi shayu yadav tzevuot stas lo yisa ekapav. Mipnei sha'am mistaklim bo. A priest who has blemishes on his hands may not lift his hands to recite the priestly blessing. Because of this blemish, people will look at his hands, and it is prohibited to look at the hands of the priest during the priestly benediction. There's a lot to be said about this as well. I know my mom taught me, Zichron Shalom, that I turn away and I look away from the bima when a Kohanim are blessing the people. Another reason is because the station of Kohen, and this too may cause us to wince a little bit, is not connected to knowledge, is not connected to the respectability of the person in the community, theoretically. It's not connected to any of that. In fact, while all of these blemishes are described in great, glorious, painful detail, if the Kohen is not intelligent, one can help him do the blessings. So that's not a criteria here. It's a physical perfection kind of thing. Rabbi Yehuda says, he adds, even one who has hands that are colored with a blue dye for whatever reason, or who have any kind of discolorations or bruises or what have you, may not lift his hands to recite the priestly blessing, because the congregation will look and will potentially be distracted or horrified. In the Gemara, it is taught in a Braita, the blemishes that the sages said disqualified a priest from reciting the priestly benediction included any blemishes found on his face, his hands, his feet, but not blemishes that are not visible to others. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says if his hands are spotted with white blotches, he may not lift his hands to recite the priestly benediction, the Birkat Kohanim. The Gemara also notes that it's taught in a Braita that if the priest's hands, if the Kohanim's hands are spotted or blemished or bruised or scabbed, he may not lift his hands to recite the priestly benediction, Birkat Kohanim. Also, if his hands are curved inward or bent sideways or an unseemly digit, he may not lift his hands to recite the Birkat HaKohanim. Apropos the previous discussion, Rav Ashi says, Amar Rav Ashi, a priest from Haifa or Beit Shan may not lift his hands to recite Birkat Kohanim because he doesn't know how to properly pronounce the guttural letters. So unlike other texts where it says, yeah, you may help the Kohen with the bracha if he knows it, this is Rav Ashi saying something else. So why? What's the difference? The difference is it's not that they don't know, but the language can be disruptive. Throughout halacha, if something involves hearing, and there's a chiyuv, there's an obligation to do something. One who has a hearing deficit is not obligated. If one is blind and something involves seeing or speaking. And so this is where people are patur in terms of their own completion of a mitzvah. The difference here is that other people are dependent on you to do these things, so they are looking. Or, as my mom taught, don't look. But that's why all these discussions, all these prohibitions, all these limitations are indicated here. It is also taught in a Braita, one may not allow the people of Beit Shan or the people of Beit Haifa, nor the people of Tivonim to pass before the ark in order to lead the service, because they pronounce the aleph as ayin and the ayin as aleph, and they therefore distort the meaning of the prayers. Again, so much exclusion, to the point that I've asked my own Rav, Eliezer Hirsch, to whom I go with all my learning questions, and I consider my Rav, the question. So here's one for you, Rabbi Hirsch. Were there really any Kohanim who could possibly meet all the established criteria? And how hard did they have to look to find animals that were just perfect? Is this a setup to indicate that this impossible degree of flawless perfection could never be met? And there isn't really an answer. It was a rhetorical question, and it wasn't. But we both had an interesting discussion about how, yes, I do think that this is to indicate that we are all limited, and perfection is not so easy to find. But we just plop along, and we do the best we can. Plop, very technical term. As the discussion in the Gemara continues, we are taught that there were indeed, and see, here we have again, and I've said this before, the accommodations. Perfection is set up. The standard is acknowledged. as is the notion that we are not going to meet the standard, and therefore we accommodate. So we are taught in the Gemara, as the discussion continues, that there were Kohanim who had disqualifying physical features who did bless the community and function. Rabbi Yochanan explains as follows. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Sama b'achat me'anav lo yisak hatav, v'hahahu dahave b'shiva voteh, de Rabbi Yochanan dahave pris yadeh. Rabbi Yochanan said, one who is blind in one eye may not lift his hands to recite the priestly blessing because people will look at him and see the blind eye. But the Gemara says, wait a minute, wasn't there a certain priest who was, a certain Kohen who was blind in one eye in the neighborhood of Rabbi Yochanan, and he would lift his hands and recite the Birkat Kohanim? The Gemara answers, that Kohen was a familiar figure in his town. And therefore, because everybody already knew what he looked like and about his eye, he would not distract them. He would not attract attention during the priestly blessing. This is also taught in a Braita. One who is blind in one eye may not lift his hands and recite the Birkat Kohanim, but if he is a familiar figure in the town, he may do so. There are many such instances where perfection is set as the goal, and there is tacit recognition that we are not really capable of achieving such perfection, and thus accommodations must be made. This is true in Masechet Chagiga, throughout the commentaries, and in so many portions of our learning. God makes these adjustments, and so we should too. God figures out a way, if you will, to put it in anthropomorphic language, how to, at the same time, include as many people as possible, and maybe also simultaneously remind us that if we want to be judgmental and exclude people, then perhaps we should all be excluded. It's an interesting concept, I think. Once again, there are several options for the Haftarah. I've chosen the one to be read in Chabad and other traditions this year, from Yechezkel chapter 36. Double Chai, we read, and the word of God came to me saying, Son of man, the house of Israel, as long as they have lived on their own land, they've defiled it by their way and by their misdeeds. Therefore, I pour my wrath upon them for the blood that they have shed in the land, because they have defiled it with the idols, and I scattered them amongst the nations, and they were dispersed. They entered the nations where they came, and they profaned my name. These are the people of the Lord. They have come out of their land, but they set no example. God continues, but I had pity on my holy nation, on my holy name. Therefore, say to the house of Israel, God says to the prophet, so says God, not for your sake I will save you, I will do what I do, but for my holy name, which you have profaned amongst other nations. In other words, you have not been an Or LaGoyim, you've not been a good role model. By your actions, people are going to think horribly of me. So therefore, God says, if you will, I will do this for my sake. I will sanctify my great name, which you have profaned in their midst. And the nations will know, V'yadu HaGoyim, Ki ani Hashem ne'um Hashem Elohim, Behikadshi Bachem Le'enechem. And then I will be sanctified through you before their eyes. I will take you, I will gather you, I will bring you to your land, I will purify you, and you will be tahartem, you will be cleansed. We go from this notion of perfection, of Kohanim and Karbanot, which cannot be attained. And again, I think the double lesson that A, we strive for perfection, we will not attain it. God knows we will not attain it. God makes accommodations. Do we make accommodations? And then in our Haftarah text from our chapter 36 of Yechezkel, we learn that, again, they were being horrible. They were not observing the laws of purity, and they were not observing the laws of how they were to act either. So therefore, we read with Zarakti Alechem Mayim Torim, God will sprinkle clean water on you, and you will be clean from all your impurities and from all the abominations. You will be cleansed. We learn here as well about disqualifications for being part of a public collective. This, by the way, is found back in our Gemara reference, where prior to the disqualifications of the Kohanim, we are also given a list of disqualifications of people who came to the public domain as well. And this is both in the Gemara and in Maimonides' Mishneh Torah. And here we learn that God will offer the tikkunim, the corrective actions that will cleanse us from imperfections. God offers the tikkunim for the priests, for the offerings, and for the people. We as humans always need this, as we are constantly contracting, disqualifying mumim, whether through physical features, as in the discussion of the Kohanim and the Karbanot, or through our absorption of the actions and influences that impact us, as in the case in Yechezkel. Parshat Tzav. Moshe is told to command Aharon and his sons regarding their offices as Kohanim to act on behalf of and for the benefit of the people, the Bnei Israel. This is truly a lofty task and one that requires perfection. However, in reality, the degree of flawlessness that is set up is virtually impossible to attain. So what do? We function as best we can. We maintain a sense of humility and understanding that in spite of those perfections, if we are known to the community and our efforts and intentions are honorable, just as our Kohanim can raise their hands to do Birkat Kohanim, we can put ourselves out there to do for the community. If our intentions are honorable, we will continue to move forward in serving God with our admitted imperfections. We will support each other, and in doing so, be the best we can be as a collective. May we all continue to understand the imperfections we ourselves hold, that others bring, and also look for the lessons found within how we deal with those imperfections, and raise all of us collectively up to be an Am Kadosh, an Am Skula, a chosen nation for God, and an Or LaGoyim, a light to the nations. Shabbat Shalom to everyone. I do know it's early, but if you hear this later in the week, it won't be as early. Bye. Lihitrot.